Hello, and welcome to another episode of Honky Talk. My name is Dr. Lassington. I work at a pet clinic, specializing in clown husbandry and clown rehabilitation. This is a podcast that covers different things I've seen in the field concerning clown husbandry and the general ownership of pets. Now, I know what you're thinking as I talk about all of this. I don't have a local clown shelter. How does this podcast even apply to me? Well, I'm here to tell you, don't worry. You do. See, you may not know it yet, listener, but there's a clown shelter just behind you can't miss it when you know what you're looking for. But with that out of the way, it's time I introduce the topic of this episode. Hard to spot clown breeds and needs. We've all been there. You're at your local shelter, and the vet techs bring up that they've got a stray who they're trying to find a good home for. They don't know where the stray came from, but they know that you would be a perfect fit for them. It's typical. But when they bring out the little guy, gal, or geriatric, boom! Disaster strikes. You get a good look at them, and you're not sure if they're a rodeo, a tramp, or even an Auguste. They have the white painted mouth, but you can't tell. Is that natural blush, or is it applied? Did they rough their clothes up on purpose, or did they get damaged during an act of daring do with their trained bull back home? It can all be quite confusing. And with confusions come issues, particularly when it comes to breed-specific habitats, needs, foods, and enrichment. Now, I know we just spent a whole episode on enrichment, so I'm not going to talk your ear off about that. For this episode, we're going to focus primarily on how to identify some of the more similar breeds, with particular care given to our white-faced clowns this episode, and then the different environments you'll want to consider for them. We'll discuss feed a whole different day. After all, there's a lot you have to be aware of when feeding your clowns. Big corporations can't be trusted when it comes to clown food. But that's enough of a non sequitur. Let's get right into it, shall we? As I hinted at in the description, it can often be really difficult to tell some differences between some of the major types of circus clowns, particularly those who don't naturally have white pale faces, but who instead use their environment to mark their faces as such. We'll be discussing this a bit more in our history segment, but this is by design, so to speak, or, in some cases, so to squeak. The ones I see most commonly getting mixed up are the Auguste and the Rodeo Clowns, which come from wildly different environments. One comes from a circus, and the other has their own entire type of show, and so they require vastly different accommodations. So we're going to start by talking about what you can do as an owner to determine which one you have. Now, one thing that's key to look at first is the amount of white paint that they use to mask their faces. Let's start with the rodeo clown. Rodeo clowns, when it comes to their faces, are rather keen to generally paint either large swaths of their face or even their entire face, in some cases, or just their mouth and eyes. Meanwhile, an Auguste will typically only paint around their mouth and their eyes, no matter what, so you can rule out an Auguste if the entire face is painted. However, what do you do if their face only has the mouth and eyes painted? They could both have those. Well, don't worry, listener, because there's two other ways you can check, and this should tell you everything you need to know. Now, as we should all know by this point, save for their feet, which are often mistaken for shoes, and the subspecies of rodeo clown who have formed a symbiotic relationship with a parasitoid barrel, which is something we'll have to do an episode on later, if you ask me. Contrary to what some may say, clown clothes are not part of their body. Instead, they choose their clothing generally related to the act they wish to perform, and so, if you think you should, you can perform an experiment. Lay out two sets of clothing, one raggedy and one more typically clownish. The one that's more clownish should have more spots, colors, and generally be eccentric in its nature, and the other one should have several holes and feature a pair of prominent jean suspenders. If it's an Auguste, typically they'll go solely for the clownish attire, whereas the rodeo will be caught somewhere in between. All of this being said, as we all know, clowns are very smart pets, so there's also the chance that they may develop preferences that are different from those that were naturally bred into them by nature. As such, I'm going to include the next tip, but I really only suggest it if you absolutely have to. After all, they may insist upon having you help and even participate in the face painting that comes after. The only true ultimate way to determine the difference between a rodeo and an Auguste is to see if you can coax your clown into a bath, where you can scrub their hooves to determine coloration. The Auguste retains the circus clown's red sheen to their hooves, whereas the rodeo clown typically retains a black or gray sheen due to the increased hardness of their keratin. So, with all of this done, let me pose a question to you, dear listener. You come across a clown. They have painted eyes and mouth, they're wearing raggedy clothes, but their hooves are bright red and sheen. What kind of clown do you have? That's right, I hinted at this before, but you've got a crossbreed that emerged from the breeding of rodeo and Auguste clowns back in the 1930s. The Tramp. I felt like this was an important thing to mention, because as far as environment, feed, and enrichment go, the Tramp is capable of adapting to any environment that an Auguste or rodeo clown might find themselves at home in. But what are those environments? You know about your clown now, but what sort of environments do they need to thrive? Those are some good first questions to be asking. After all, we want them to thrive, and not merely survive in this world. Now, rodeo clowns are definitely the needier of the two, as when you adopt a rodeo clown, you won't just be adopting a rodeo clown. You'll also be adopting their pack-bonded bull, which they have trained to take part in their acts in such a way as to avoid harming either the clown, bull, or even those watching the act. As such, you'll want to make sure that you have lots of large open space for them to play together in, and to make sure that you've done your research on bulls. For that, I might recommend a podcast I've started listening to recently called Bullshit. Huh? Is that what our phone sounds like now? I guess so. Hello? This is Dr. Lassington with Area Animal Hospital. Can I help you? Are Jaculatrix? Oh, the ambassador clown? Yeah, she's doing wonderfully. Thank you for asking. But, I'm kind of in the middle of... yeah, I guess she did seem to be craving something. Pastries? Batty didn't really strike me as the type to have a sweet tooth. But I'll keep that in mind. But do I know you? Oh, sorry, I didn't recognize you. I've only ever spoken to you in person. Man, golly gee willikers, phones really are something these days, huh? If you could keep an eye on patient H-15-14-11 for me, that would be awesome. I think she may be coming down with something, and you just hung up on me, didn't you? Right, where was I again? Right! Yes, Auguste environments are a lot simpler to deal with, as they typically want to be part of a circus troupe, so that they have both a traditional white-faced clown to work with, as well as a straight man for all their antics. I suggest a clown advocate-approved mini tent for your backyard, as they should be able to use it in much the same fashion as they would a clown car, expanding the space on the inside to create an infinitesimal world of imagination. However, if that isn't feasible, you should work with your clowns to build one yourself, out of cloth and cardboard. Just make sure to bring it in before the rain! But I suppose there's still the elephant in the room, huh? Of why the Auguste and the rodeo clown are so similar. And why is it that when they come together, they make what we commonly know today as the Tramp? For that, we're gonna need to take a step back in time, for a bit of a history and a little bit of a genetic lesson. Now, clowns are a bit of a strange species in that they all descend from what are known as proto-jesters, and we really don't know where proto-jesters originated from, as clowns of all shapes and sizes can be found most places as far back as 2400 BC. But what's interesting is that when you look at a clown evolutionary tree, we see something really interesting. Unlike some species, we don't often see clowns wiping out or completely overtaking their previous iterations, and this is something we see very prominently in circus clowns, whom appear to create various different types of clowns as they travel across the world. And rather than one or the other becoming a dominant clown in an area, they instead work together to raise everyone else up, in a symbiotic relationship that we believe to be the foundation of troops. This is why, interestingly enough, circus clowns were first found in England in the 1800s, as part of a comedy routine known as harlequinades. Of course, during the early 1800s, as we all know, the Industrial Revolution was well underway, and as we all know, England's weather has always been tenuous at best. As such, the common jester and harlequin were running into a plethora of different issues. Sure, they could still do slapstick, but they were having difficulties with the constantly wet roads, because their thin, curved feet were leading to a lot more slipping than natural. As such, they evolved to grow wider-based hooves, the traditional clown shoe look we know and love today, and their hide became thicker in general to shrug off the widely played down effects that acid rain had on the sensitive skin of jesters. However, from here we observed a split of sorts in the circus clown evolutionary tree, as the Auguste came to be in roughly 1860 in England as a clown to sort of foul things up for the circus clown during a trick. This was part of a well-maintained comedy routine, and generally came about as the clown simply sought to be funnier every day. Any joke that's funny with one person can be made funnier with two, doubly so if the second person isn't in on it. They then went about changing their appearance so that they could be marked out in a troupe. Their white face paint was shifted to only be around the eyes and mouths, to show that they weren't full white-faced clowns, and their shoe-like hooves began to change back towards a more natural shoe shape, as much of their act required quickly coming or going to spoil another clown's act. However, America was having its own clown revolution, as roughly 40 years later, in the early 1900s, with the start of professional rodeo shows, came the Rodeo Clown. Circus clowns who had evolved to form a pack bond with the bulls and began training them to give the appearance of a fight, without performing damage to either the clown, the bull, or their surroundings. As such, without other clowns around, their white-faced makeup became less and less important to them, and their clothes had to change to fit their different environment and tasks, with a lot more agility being favored in this new situation. Most and foremost, however, they lost the oversized hooves of the circus clown, as, naturally, rodeos happen in drier sections of America. So, it should be no surprise then that, once travel between England and America became more and more common, that somebody saw that, hey, we have these two new breeds of clowns, what happens when we put them together? And so they bred them together, and that's where we got the Tramp. A clown with the adaptability of a rodeo clown and the comedic sense of timing that came from the Auguste. The rest is, as they say, honkstery. And with that, yes, I know, that brings us to the end of our episode. I've got a meeting in just a few minutes, as I need to go continue helping our ambassador clown Batty learn to walk again. But before I go, I'd just like to give a quick update and say that she's doing great. Everyone here loves her, and she's all around seeming to really thrive under our care. But for now, I guess that's really all I've got for today's episode. If you've enjoyed this episode of Honky Talk, please remember to like, comment, and subscribe, and anything else that seems appropriate for our little talk show. As always, I'm Dr. Lassington, and I'm a bit clueless with this sort of thing, so every little bit means the world to me. Other than that, all I can really ask is that you have a nice day.